A billionaire's daughter was born into a world of gold, diamonds, and endless luxuries. But there was one thing money could never buy: her voice. She had lived her entire life in silence, never speaking a single word. Doctors failed, specialists failed, and her father gave up hope. But then one day, a poor black girl appeared at the mansion gates with strange glowing liquid in her hand. And when the mute daughter drank it, the impossible happened. Silence. That's the first thing you'd notice when you stepped inside the Langford mansion. Not the glittering chandeliers, not the golden staircases, not the endless paintings and statues, but the silence. It wasn't the kind of quiet that felt peaceful. No, it was heavy, unnatural, as if the entire house was holding its breath. And at the center of this silence was Clara Langford, the only daughter of billionaire Richard Langford. Clara had never spoken a single word in her life. She wasn't shy. She wasn't stubborn. She simply could not speak. From the moment she was born, her voice never came. Not a cry, not a laugh, not even the faintest whisper. To the world, she was mute. To her father, she was his greatest heartbreak. Doctors came and went. The richest specialists from around the globe lined up at the Langford estate, each promising they had the answer. They tried surgeries, therapies, medicines, and miracle treatments. But every attempt ended the same way: disappointment. Clara's lips never moved. Her father spent millions chasing hope, but in the end, money couldn't buy the one thing he wanted most: his daughter's voice. And that silence didn't just haunt Richard. It haunted everyone who worked in the mansion. The maids spoke in hushed tones. The cooks worked quietly in the kitchen. Even the guards at the gates avoided laughter. It was as if the entire household carried the weight of Clara's silence on their shoulders. But Clara herself, she wasn't sad. At least, not on the outside. She moved through the world with wide, curious eyes, her golden hair catching the sunlight like threads of fire, her hands always busy with sketches and notes. She communicated by writing, scribbling down quick sentences on a little notepad she carried everywhere. Her father admired her strength, but deep inside, he knew she longed for something she could never have: the power to speak, to laugh, to sing. Imagine being trapped in silence, watching other children shout, giggle, argue, and sing while you sat quietly, unable to join. That was Clara's world, lonely, isolated, and unchangeable. At least, that's what everyone thought. But fate has a way of surprising us. Because one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of orange and pink, Clara wandered through the garden. The Langford estate was enormous, filled with roses and fountains, hedges trimmed into perfect shapes, and marble benches placed among the flowers. It was her favorite place to walk, her quiet escape from the suffocating mansion. And that's when she saw her. Standing just beyond the tall black iron gates was a girl around her age. But she was nothing like the people Clara usually saw. Her clothes were simple, worn from use, and her shoes looked too small for her feet. Yet she didn't look weak or sad. She looked calm, steady, almost glowing. What caught Clara's attention most wasn't the girl's face or clothes, but what she was holding. In her hands was a small glass bottle, and inside that bottle was a liquid that shimmered in the evening light, almost as if it were alive. It wasn't ordinary water. It wasn't juice. It looked like something magical, glowing softly with a strange golden blue light. Clara froze, her wide eyes locked on the bottle. The girl noticed her and smiled gently. She stepped closer to Gates and whispered, her voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. "This liquid is special. It's not for everyone, but maybe it's for you." Clara's heart raced. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but of course, she couldn't. She fumbled for her notepad, scribbled down words as fast as she could, and pressed it against the iron bars for the stranger to read. "What is it?" The girl's eyes softened. She held the bottle closer, and the glow seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "My grandmother taught me how to make it," she whispered. "It's not medicine. It's something deeper. But it only works if you truly believe." Clara blinked, confused. Believe? Believe in what? She wanted to ask, but before she could write more, the girl gently placed the bottle in her hands. Clara felt its warmth immediately. The glass wasn't cold. It hummed faintly, like it carried energy within it. "Don't be afraid. the girl said. Sometimes the things we need most don't come from doctors or money. They come from faith. And with that, the mysterious girl stepped back. Her figure began to blur into the shadows of the street, and within seconds, she was gone. Clara gripped the glowing bottle tightly, her heart pounding. What had just happened? Who was that girl? And what was this strange, shimmering liquid? As the last rays of sunlight faded, Clara knew only one thing for certain. Something inside her told her this moment was different. This was another useless remedy, another failed attempt. This was something else, something powerful, something impossible, and she didn't yet realize it, but her entire life was about to change forever. The Langford estate wasn't just a house. It was a kingdom, perched on a hill overlooking the city. It stretched across acres of carefully sculpted land. From the gates, visitors walked a long marble path lined with towering oak trees before finally reaching the mansion itself, a structure so massive it seemed to swallow the sky. The walls were built of pale stone, imported from Europe, shining like ivory in the sunlight. Giant windows glimmered like mirrors. The roof sparkled with polished tiles. From the outside, it looked perfect, like a castle pulled straight from a fairy tale. But inside, it was nothing like a fairy tale. The first thing anyone noticed when stepping to the towering front doors was not the chandeliers dripping with crystals, or the staircases wrapped in gold railings, or the endless paintings worth millions. No, what they noticed was a silence. The Langford mansion was quiet in a way that made even the bravest guest uncomfortable. The air was heavy, as though the walls themselves carried sorrow. And at the center of that sorrow was Clara. Clara Langford, the only daughter of Richard Langford, was a beautiful child. Her golden hair framed a pale, angelic face, and her bright blue eyes shone with curiosity. She was intelligent, kind, and observant, but her silence overshadowed everything. Clara had never spoken a word since birth. It wasn't that she didn't try. Sometimes, when she was alone, she would press her lips together and force air through her throat, hoping, begging for a sound to come. But nothing ever did. Her voice was locked away, trapped behind invisible walls. Her father, Richard, had spent years trying to tear down those walls. He was a man who could buy anything, companies, islands, even influence over governments. But despite all his money and power, he could not buy the one thing he wanted most, his daughter's voice. Specialists from every corner of the world had been flown to the estate. American surgeons, French neurologists, Japanese speech experts. All of them had tried. They attached machines, prescribed medicines, and suggested endless therapies. But every treatment ended the same way: silence. Richard's frustration grew with every failure. He was used to being in control, to solving problems with money, with influence. But this was a battle he couldn't win. For a man like him, it was unbearable. And so the mansion lived in quiet grief. The maids walked softly through the halls, as if even their footsteps might disturb Clara. The chefs in the kitchen prepared the most exquisite meals, yet they rarely heard the sound of laughter at the dining table. Even the security guards at the gates, strong and stern, felt a strange chill in their bones whenever they worked the night shift. It was as if the entire estate carried the weight of Clara's silence. Despite it all, Clara was not bitter. She had grown up in the strange world of wealth and quiet, and though she often felt isolated, she did not show sadness. She was gentle and kind to the staff, often leaving them handwritten thank you notes when words would not come. She loved sketching in her notebook, drawing pictures of flowers, birds, and sometimes even people she'd never met. But deep inside, Clara longed for one thing: to speak. She dreamed of being able to say good morning to her father, to sing the songs she wrote in her head, to laugh out loud instead of silently. She dreamed of living without silence. Richard knew this, even if Clara never said it. He saw it in her eyes, the way she watched other children when they visited, her gaze lingering on their moving lips, her hand tightening around her notepad when they laughed. He saw the sadness she tried to hide, and it broke him. In his study, late at night, Richard often sat alone by the fireplace with a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring into the flames. He was a man who had conquered the business world, who had everything anyone could ever desire. Yet he felt like the poorest man alive. Because what use was money if he could not give his daughter the one thing she wanted most. And so, the mansion became a palace of silence, a golden cage for a bird that could never sing. But fate is strange. It often hides miracles in the most unexpected places, and delivers them at the most unlikely times. Richard didn't know it, Clara didn't know it, and none of the servants could imagine it. But far beyond those tall iron gates, far beyond the endless acres of gardens and fountains, something was coming. Something that would break the silence forever. One day, a mysterious girl, poor, barefoot, unknown, would appear at those gates with a glowing bottle in her hands. And when Clara touched it, when she dared to drink it, the walls of silence that had trapped her all her life would begin to crumble. The mansion that had been built on wealth and silence was about to witness the impossible. The Langford Gardens were Clara's escape. While the mansion itself felt heavy and suffocating, the gardens outside were alive with color and sound. The air smelled of roses, lilies, and fresh-cut grass. Birds darted to branches of tall oaks, their songs filling the air. Songs Clara could only admire but never join. She often wandered the stone pathways, her sketchbook in hand, drawing whatever caught her eye. Sometimes she would pause to watch the koi fish in the pond, their orange and white bodies shimmering like jewels in the water. Other times, she sat beneath the marble statues, imagining what it would be like to whisper secrets to them, as if they could answer. But that evening felt different. The sun was setting low in the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange, pink, and purple. The air was cooler, softer, and the shadows of the trees stretched long across the garden path. Clara, barefoot as she liked to be in the evenings, wandered toward the tall black iron gates at the edge of the estate. Normally, the gates were quiet. Guards stood watch, but no one ever dared to approach. The Langfords were too powerful, too rich, too untouchable. Yet that night, Clara stopped suddenly. Someone was there. On the other side of the gate stood a girl about her age, perhaps a little older. She was nothing like the people Clara usually saw. No fine dresses, no polished shoes, no glittering jewelry. Instead, she wore a faded dress, the fabric patched in places, and her sandals looked worn thin. Her skin glowed a deep brown under the fading sunlight, and her dark hair was tied back with simple ribbon. But what caught Clara's eye most wasn't her face or her clothes. It was what she was holding. In her hands was a small glass bottle, no bigger than a teacup, and inside that bottle was a liquid that shimmered faintly, almost as if it were alive. It glowed with a strange golden blue light, like sunlight trapped in water. Clara froze, her wide blue eyes fixed on the bottle. Her heart thudded in her chest. The girl noticed her and smiled softly. Unlike most people who looked at Clara with pity or curiosity, this girl's gaze was calm, steady, almost knowing. She stepped closer to the gate, her voice barely above a whisper. "This liquid is special. It's not for everyone, but maybe it's for you." Clara's breath caught in her throat. Her first instinct was to run back to the mansion, but something inside her told her to stay. She wanted to ask questions. What was it? Where did it come from? Why her? But of course, she couldn't speak. Her hands trembled as she dug into her pocket and pulled out the small notepad she always carried. With quick strokes of her pencil, she scribbled. "What is it?" She held the paper up to the iron bars. The girl's dark eyes softened as she read the words. She held the bottle up, letting the fading sunlight catch its glow. "My grandmother taught me how to make it," she whispered. "It's not medicine. It's not anything you'll find in a hospital. It's something deeper, something people stopped believing in a long time ago." Clara's brow furrowed. She scribbled again. "Will it make me speak?" The girl tilted her head, studying her. "It might, but it only works if you truly believe." The words made Clara shiver. Believe? Believe in what magic? Faith? Herself? She didn't know. All she knew was that no doctor, no medicine, no fortune had ever helped her. And now, here was a stranger offering hope in the form of a glowing bottle. Before Clara could write more, the girl pressed the bottle gently into her hands through the bars. Clara gasped as her fingers closed around it. The glass wasn't cold. It was warm, humming faintly, as if a heartbeat pulsed inside it. "Don't be afraid," the girl said softly. Sometimes the answers we need most don't come from money or science or even reason. Sometimes they come from faith. Clara clutched the bottle, her heart pounding. She wanted to write something more. "Who are you?" "Why, me." But when she looked up, the girl was already stepping back. The shadows swallowed her figure, the last rays of sunlight glinting off her ribbon before she disappeared into the distance. Clara stood frozen by the gate, staring after her. For the first time in her life, she felt a spark of something she had almost given up on long ago: hope. She lowered her gaze to the bottle in her hands. The liquid inside shimmered and swirled, glowing softly in the dim light. It felt alive, powerful, mysterious. She didn't understand what it was. She didn't know if it would help her. But something deep inside whispered, "This is different." Clutching the bottle tightly, she turned and hurried back toward the mansion. Her bare feet padded against the stone path, her golden hair flowing behind her in the evening breeze. The silence of the Langford estate was about to meet something it had never faced before. And though Clara didn't realize it yet, the girl at the gates had just handed her the key to a miracle. Clara hurried back to the gardens, her bare feet brushing against the soft grass, her small hands clutching the glowing bottle tightly to her chest. The evening air grew cooler, and shadows stretched across the path as the last rays of sunlight faded behind the hills. By the time she stepped into mansion's towering doors, the glow of the bottle seemed brighter against the dim hallways. No one noticed her return. The maids were busy preparing dinner, the guards had retreated to their posts, and her father was still locked away in his study, probably drowning himself in paperwork and worry. Clara was glad for silence. For once, it allowed her to slip unnoticed into her room. She shut the heavy oak door behind her and leaned against it, breathing hard. Only then did she dare to lift the bottle and really look at it. It was beautiful. The glass was clear but seemed thicker than ordinary glass, etched with tiny, swirling patterns that caught the light. Inside, the liquid shimmered and shifted like it wasn't liquid at all, but living energy. One moment it glowed golden, like sunlight caught in a jar. The next, it turned a soft blue, like moonlight on water. Clara's hands trembled. She had seen strange remedies before, teas, oils, powders brought by hopeful healers. But none of them had ever looked like this. None had ever felt alive. She set it carefully on her desk, next to her stack of sketchbooks and pencils, and sat down. The glow lit her room in soft hues, casting dancing reflections on the walls. Clara stared at it for a long time, her thoughts tangled. Could this really work? Could it give me a voice? A voice. The thing she had dreamed of her entire life. The thing her father had begged the world for, only to be denied again and again. Clara could still remember the look in his eyes whenever a doctor left shaking their head. It wasn't just disappointment. It was heartbreak. He loved her deeply. She knew that, but her silence was a wound he could never heal. And what if this was the answer? What if this small, glowing bottle, handed to her by a poor stranger at the gates, could do what all the wealth in the world could not? Her heart fluttered with excitement, but also with fear. What if it was dangerous? What if it made her sick or worse? What if it was all a trick, and she ended up humiliating herself in front of her father? Clara's hands moved instinctively to her notepad. She scribbled furiously. What if it hurts me? What if it doesn't work? What if I'm just being foolish? She stared at the words, then dropped the pencil. The girl's voice echoed in her mind. It only works if you truly believe. Believe. The word felt heavy. What did it mean to believe? She had grown up surrounded by science, medicine, and logic. Her father trusted only in facts, in money, in the power of what could be proven. But this was something else. Something unexplainable. Clara stood and walked to the mirror above her dresser. She looked at her reflection, the golden-haired girl with curious eyes who had never spoken a word. Her lips parted slightly, as if to test themselves, but no sound came. She pressed her hand against the glass, whispering in her heart what she could never whisper aloud. I just want to be free. Her gaze fell back to the bottle. It shimmered faintly, almost as if it were responding to her thoughts. The glow pulsed once like a heartbeat. Clara's chest tightened. She felt torn between fear and hope, between reason and faith. Finally, She sat down at her desk, picked up the bottle, and held it close. The glass was warm against her skin, humming softly. It felt safe, somehow. Not threatening, not dangerous. Like it wanted to help her. Her fingers fumbled with the small cork stopper. It popped open with a soft click, and instantly, the room filled with a faint, sweet fragrance, like wild honey mixed with fresh rain. Clara's eyes widened. She lifted it to her nose and inhaled deeply. The scent wrapped around her like a comforting blanket. Her heart raced. This was it. She had a choice: leave it sealed forever or take a chance. She hesitated for one last moment, whispering silently in her mind, "Please, let this work." Then, with trembling hands, she raised the bottle to her lips. The liquid touched her tongue. It was nothing like she expected. Sweet, yes, but not in a sugary, candy way. It tasted pure, fresh, like spring water kissed with golden honey. It spread warmth across her mouth, down her throat, and into her chest. For a moment, she panicked. What if it burned? What if it poisoned her? But the warmth wasn't painful. It was comforting, like sunlight soaking into her skin after a long winter. Clara lowered the bottle, gasping softly through her nose. The glow inside dimmed slightly, as though it had given part of itself to her. She clutched her chest, feeling the warmth spread wider, into her arms, her fingertips, even the tips of her ears. Then silence. She waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, nothing. Her shoulders slumped. Her eyes filled with tears. It hadn't worked. It was just another false hope, another trick. She set the bottle down with shaking hands and buried her face in her arms. Why had she believed? Why had she trusted a stranger? But then, something shifted. A strange tingling sensation crept up her throat. Her chest tightened, not painfully, but like something was moving, something trying to push its way free. Clara's eyes flew open. Her hand flew to her neck. And in the quiet of her room, in the mansion of silence, a sound rose from her lips. It was soft, broken, barely audible, but it was real. A whisper, her very first sound. The whisper lingered in the air like a fragile spark. Clara froze. Her hand pressed her throat, eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment, she wondered if she had imagined it. Was it just air escaping her lungs in a strange way? Or had that faint sound really come from her? Her heart thundered in her chest. She sat up straighter, her hands trembling, and leaned toward the mirror across the room. Her reflection stared back, pale and shocked, as if it too couldn't believe what had just happened. She opened her mouth again, her lips parting cautiously, her throat tightening. She forced air up through her chest, willing, pleading for something to happen. A sound. It cracked, broken and raspy, like the faintest echo of a word. But it was real. Clara gasped. Tears sprang to her eyes, her chest heaving with both fear and joy. All her life she had lived in silence, believing her voice was locked away forever. But now, something had shifted. Something had awakened. She grabbed her notepad with shaky hands and scribbled in frantic letters. It worked. But writing wasn't enough anymore. She didn't want to scribble her feelings. She wanted to speak them. She wanted to hear them. Her gaze darted back to the glowing bottle on the desk. The liquid inside swirled softly, dimmer than before, as if it had given her part of its power. Clara reached for it with trembling fingers. She hesitated only a moment before lifting it again. Another sip. The warmth spread through her chest instantly, flowing like sunlight through her veins. It wasn't harsh. It wasn't frightening. It was comforting, powerful. Her body trembled as her throat tingled, almost burning with energy. She clutched her neck, her mouth opening on instinct. This time, the sound that came out was clearer, still weak but more defined. A shape, a word. Father. The word cracked like glass, fragile and imperfect, but it was unmistakable. Clara's hand flew to her mouth as her eyes flooded with tears. Her lips quivered, her breath hitched. She had spoken. Spoken. For the first time in her life, an actual word had escaped her lips. Her voice was soft, fragile, like a newborn bird testing its wings. But to her, It was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. She stumbled to the mirror, staring at herself as though she were a stranger. Her golden hair tumbled around her shoulders. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement, and her lips, those lips that had only mouthed silent words all her life, had finally released a sound. Clara's knees buckled, and she sank onto the floor, clutching the bottle to her chest. Sobs racked her body, not of sadness, but of overwhelming joy. She laughed without sound, then tried again. This time, a broken giggle escaped her lips. It startled her so much that she clapped a hand over her mouth, wide-eyed. She could laugh. She could make sounds. She could speak. The dam inside her heart had cracked open, and emotions she had buried for years came pouring out. Memories flooded her. The endless appointments with doctors, the pitying looks from strangers, the disappointment in her father's eyes. All those years of silence, of loneliness, of longing, and now, with just a few sips of mysterious liquid, the impossible had begun. Clara pushed herself to her feet, her hands still trembling. She stumbled back to her desk, her eyes fixed on the glowing bottle. She wanted to scream, to shout, to sing. She wanted to pour out every word she had ever written in her notebooks. But her voice was still weak, fragile, like a candle flame flickering in the wind. She knew she had to be careful. But at the same time, she couldn't stop. She had to try again. Father, she whispered, her voice a little clearer this time. Her throat ached, but she didn't care. She pressed her hands together in front of her face, whispering through tears. Thank you. The words were shaky, almost broken, but they were real. Her first true prayer, spoken aloud, not written. For the first time in her life, Clara heard her own voice. She collapsed onto her bed, clutching the bottle tightly, as tears streamed down her face. Every part of her trembled, but her heart soared higher than it ever had. She whispered the word again and again, testing it, feeling the strange miracle vibrate in her chest. Father, Father, Father. Each time, it grew a little easier, a little stronger, but the effort exhausted her. Her throat burned with strain, and her eyelids grew heavy. The bottle still glowed faintly on her bedside table, but Clara set it down carefully, as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. She curled beneath her blanket, her lips still moving as she whispered broken words into the night. For the first time since her birth, the Langford mansion was not silent, and though no one else in the house had yet heard it, the air inside her room carried the first fragile sounds of a miracle. Clara drifted to sleep with a smile on her face, her tears drying on her cheeks. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. She did not know what her father would say when he heard her voice. All she knew was this: silence no longer owned her. The impossible had begun. The Langford mansion was a place of routine silence. Even though it was filled with servants, tutors, and expensive guests from time to time, everyone knew the unspoken rule: keep the noise low. Why? Because sound reminded them of what was missing. The daughter of the house, Clara, who had never spoken a word in her life. But that morning, something changed. It began faintly, a whisper so fragile, so delicate, it almost sounded like the wind slipping through the cracks of the great windows. The maids paused mid-step in the hallway, frowning. The butler, polishing silver in the dining room, raised his head sharply. Something was different. Something was alive. Upstairs, behind the carved mahogany door of Clara's room, a miracle was unfolding. Clara sat at her writing desk, staring down at her notebook. But instead of scribbling her thoughts like she had done for years, she leaned forward, parted her trembling lips, and let a sound escape. The word was weak, broken, almost painful, but it was a word nonetheless. Her own ears heard it. The walls of her room caught it. And beyond the door, the sound slipped into the vast mansion like a spark of lightning cutting through the dark. The maid closest to her door gasped. She had worked in the Langford home for nearly 6 years. She had seen Clara grow from a child into a young woman. She had seen her scribble notes, laugh silently, cry silently. Never once had she heard her speak. Yet now she swore she had. She pressed her ear to the door. For a moment, there was only silence again. Then, faint but undeniable, The sound returned. "Thank you." The maid staggered back, her hand covering her mouth. She wanted to shout, to tell the whole household, but fear held her tongue. What if it was just her imagination? What if it was a cruel trick of her mind, desperate to believe in something that could never be? But Clara knew it was real. Her throat burned, but she pressed on, whispering words she had never dared dream she could say. "Father!" "Thank you, thank you." Her voice cracked and broke, but every syllable filled her with strength. She wanted the world to hear. She wanted her father to hear. And downstairs, that father, Mr. Jonathan Langford, one of the most powerful millionaires in the city, was seated in his grand study. He was surrounded by papers, contracts, and a half-finished cup of coffee. His life was measured in numbers and deals, but his heart carried a single, silent wound: his daughter's muteness. For years, he had spared no expense. Specialists from around the globe had flown in and out of the mansion. Some had promised hope. Some had delivered nothing but disappointment. Slowly, his heart had hardened. He had stopped believing in miracles. But then, "Father," the word drifted down the grand staircase. So faint, he thought it was a trick of his imagination. He froze, the pen in his hand slipping to the desk. No, impossible. He pushed his chair back. His breath caught in his throat. His ears strained to the sound again, desperate and afraid. And then he heard it, clearer this time. "Father." The cup of coffee slipped from his hand and shattered against the floor, spilling dark liquid across the marble. Jonathan Langford didn't even notice. His heart was racing, his chest tight. He stumbled out of his study, his polished shoes echoing down the hallway. The servants looked at him, wide-eyed, but no one spoke. They all seemed to hear it too, the impossible sound drifting down from the second floor. Clara's voice. Jonathan's legs moved faster than his mind could comprehend. He climbed the grand staircase 2 steps at a time, his breath coming in sharp bursts. Each sound that escaped from Clara's room spurred him on. By the time he reached her door, his hands were trembling. He gripped the knob, frozen for a moment, afraid. Afraid it wasn't real. Afraid that opening the door would shatter the fragile miracle he had just heard. But then, "Father." This time it was undeniable. Tears welled in his eyes. With a trembling hand, he turned the knob and pushed the door open. Inside, Clara sat at her desk, tears streaming down her face, her hands pressed against her throat. She looked up at him, her lips parting. And then, slow, weak but real, she whispered again, "Father." The word broke him. Jonathan stumbled forward, his chest heaving, his vision blurred with tears. He had not cried in years, not since Clara's mother had passed away. But now, every tear he had ever held back poured freely. "Clara," his voice cracked, but was full of awe. You spoke?" Clara nodded through her sobs, her trembling lips curving into a smile. "Father," she whispered again, as if the word itself was her gift to him. Jonathan collapsed to his knees before her, gathering her into his arms. For years he had dreamed of hearing her voice just once, and now, here it was, a fragile miracle made real. The maids and butler had gathered outside the doorway, peering in with tearful eyes. None dared interrupt, but none could look away. The mansion, once a place of wealth and silence, had been transformed in a single moment. The impossible sound had been spoken, and with it, the beginning of something greater had begun. The Langford mansion had never felt so alive. The air was heavy with shock, trembling with whispers, and yet filled with something it had lacked for years. Hope. Clara's voice, fragile but real, still echoed in her father's ears. Jonathan Langford couldn't let go of her, holding her as if she were a miracle he might lose at any second. His expensive suit was damp from her tears, but he didn't care. For the first time in decades, his wealth, his contracts, his empire, none of it mattered. Only this moment did. But after the tears came the questions. Jonathan pulled back slightly, gripping Clara's shoulders, staring deep into her watery blue eyes. His own were red and swollen, his face lined with disbelief. "Clara," his voice cracked. "How? How is this possible? The doctors!" Every single one said it was hopeless. Years of silence, and now you can speak? Clara's lips trembled. Her throat still ached, every word scraping like glass. But she needed to answer him. She tried to shape the words, her voice faint and halting. "Not doctors," she whispered. "Her." Jonathan blinked. He leaned closer, desperate. "Her? Who? Tell me, Clara, who did this? Who gave you this miracle?" Clara swallowed hard. Her gaze flicked toward her desk. The glowing bottle sat there, its light dimmer now, but still pulsing faintly as though alive. Jonathan followed her gaze, and when his eyes landed on the strange bottle, his breath caught. "What is that?" he demanded, standing abruptly. His hand shot out, snatching the bottle from the desk. He held it up to the light, his fingers trembling. The liquid swirled unnaturally, shimmering with a glow unlike anything he had ever seen. His heart raced. This was no medicine he had ever paid for, no treatment brought in by a specialist. This was something else, something strange, something powerful. Clara raised her hand weakly, pointing to the bottle, her lips forming shaky words. "She gave it to me. She? Who is she?" Jonathan's voice was sharp now, the fear in his chest twisting into suspicion. He turned back to his daughter, his eyes burning with urgency. "Clara, tell me who gave this to you." Clara closed her eyes, gathering strength. When she opened them again, she whispered one word. "Girl." Jonathan frowned. "What girl?" Clara took a shallow breath. "Black girl." The words hit the air like a thunderclap. The servants at the doorway exchanged startled glances. Jonathan froze, his grip tightening on the glowing bottle. "A black girl." His voice dropped, heavy with disbelief. "A stranger gave you this? When? Where?" Clara's tears welled again. She tried her best, her voice still faint. "Garden last night." Jonathan's mind reeled. Last night, he had been away at a dinner meeting. The mansion had been quiet. But Clara, curious, lonely Clara, must have slipped into the gardens. And there she had met someone. Jonathan crouched back down in front of his daughter, his voice gentler but no less desperate. "Clara, listen to me. Who is she? Did she tell you her name? Did she say where she came from?" Clara shook her head weakly. Her lips formed broken words. "She, poor, closed, eyes kind." Jonathan's throat tightened. A poor girl, a stranger. She had come to his home, somehow, and offered Clara this glowing liquid. A liquid that had done what science could not. His chest burned with conflicting emotions. Relief, joy, fear, suspicion. Was this truly a miracle? Or was it something darker? He glanced down at the bottle again, holding it carefully as though it might shatter. The glow seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. It was beautiful and terrifying. "Why would she give you this?" he murmured to himself. "What does she want?" Clara reached out, her hand shaking, touching his sleeve. She said, Clara struggled, her voice breaking with effort, said, "I would need it." Jonathan stiffened. Her words echoed in his mind like a warning. "You would need it." The phrase was heavy with mystery. Did this girl know something they didn't? Was this gift freely given or part of something greater? The butler, who had silently stood by the doorway, finally cleared his throat, his voice low and careful. "Sir, should we find her?" Jonathan turned sharply, his expression hardened now. "Yes, find her. Immediately." The servants exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared refuse. Clara, however, clutched her father's arm, her eyes pleading. "No, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jonathan looked down at her, startled. "No, Clara, this girl gave you something that changed everything. We must know who she is, what she wants, where she came from." Clara's tears spilled over. She shook her head weakly, her lips forming words that broke Jonathan's heart. "She... kind not bad." Jonathan's chest tightened. Clara's instincts had always been pure, unclouded by suspicion or greed. She trusted easily, sometimes too easily. But he had built his empire on caution. He couldn't afford blind faith. Not now. Not when his daughter's miracle came from the hands of a stranger. He stood tall, the glowing bottle clutched firmly in his hand. "Clara, I believe you. But kindness alone doesn't explain this." He lifted the bottle higher, its light casting eerie shadows across his face. This is not natural. I must know what it is." Clara lowered her gaze, her body trembling. She didn't want her father to frighten the girl. She remembered the poor black girl's warm eyes, her gentle voice, the way she had pressed the bottle into Clara's hand, without asking for anything in return. That girl had not seemed dangerous. She had seemed like hope. But Jonathan Langford could not see it that way. He was a man who had lost too much, who had been disappointed too many times. And now, his daughter's miracle had arrived wrapped in mystery, and that was something he could not leave unanswered. He turned to the butler, his voice low but firm. "Gather the staff. Search the grounds. Search the town if you must. Find the black girl who gave this bottle to my daughter. Bring her to me." The butler bowed slightly, his face pale. "Yes, sir." The servants dispersed quickly, their footsteps echoing through the mansion halls. Clara reached out again, whispering desperately, "Father, please don't hurt her." Jonathan crouched once more, his hardened face softening at her plea. He kissed her trembling hand. "I promise, Clara, I won't harm her. But I need to know, for your sake, for our sake." Clara nodded weakly, though her heart twisted with worry. As her father left the room, the bottle still glowing in his hand, Clara lay back against her pillows, whispering softly to herself. She kind, but even as she whispered, a flicker of fear crossed her mind. Who was the mysterious black girl who had appeared so suddenly, given her the liquid, and vanished into the night? And why had she said Clara would need it? The questions lingered in the air, heavy and unsettling. The miracle had happened, but the mystery had only begun. The Langford estate had always been a fortress of order, gardens trimmed to perfection, servants moving with quiet discipline, and security keeping unwanted eyes at bay. But that night, chaos rippled through its marble halls. Jonathan Langford's command was absolute: find the girl. The staff scrambled, some carrying lanterns into the gardens, others hurrying toward the iron gates. Word spread quickly through the mansion like wildfire. Whispers trailed down every corridor, every corner. The mute daughter had spoken. A poor black girl had given her something. A miracle had happened. For years, the Langfords had been known as a family of wealth, mystery, and tragedy. Now, the tragedy seemed to have cracked open, and everyone wanted to see what spilled out. The mansion grounds. The gardens, once peaceful and serene, now bustled with frantic footsteps. The butler, Mr. Graves, held a lantern high, his stern face illuminated in the golden glow. Behind him, 3 maids whispered nervously as they searched the rose bushes and hedges. "Do you think she's still here?" one asked, her voice trembling. "Foolish girl," another snapped softly. "If she was poor, she's long gone by now." But Mr. Graves wasn't so sure. He had worked for the Langfords long enough to know that strange things always carried deeper roots. He leaned close to the shrubs, scanning for footprints in the damp soil. And there they appeared, small, light steps pressed into the earth, leading toward the outer walls. "She was here," he muttered under his breath. The trail led toward the farthest corner of the estate, near a servant's gate rarely used. The footprints were faint, but they were real. The town below. Meanwhile, Jonathan had not waited idly in the mansion. He called for his driver, climbed into a sleek black car, and ordered to be taken into town. The city streets were still alive with activity, market stalls closing for the night, children chasing one another, old women gossiping on porches. Jonathan stepped out of the car, his sharp suit and polished shoes drawing stares. Few had ever seen the millionaire walking these streets himself. He approached a group of vendors packing their crates. His voice was deep, commanding. "I'm looking for a girl. A young black girl. Poor clothes, kind eyes. She may have been near my estate last night. Did anyone see her?" The vendors exchanged cautious glances. One old man rubbed his chin. "A girl like that, yes, I think I saw her. She passed through the market yesterday, carrying nothing but a small satchel. Bought a piece of bread with her last coin, then disappeared down the alley. Jonathan's heart raced. She was real, not a ghost, not a trick of Clara's imagination. She was here. He pressed the man further. Did she say her name? The old man shook his head. No name, but she had a look about her, like she carried a secret heavier than her satchel. Jonathan's jaw tightened. That matched perfectly with the mystery in Clara's trembling words. The mansion at night. Back at the estate, Clara lay awake in her bed, staring at the glowing bottle on her nightstand. The light had dimmed to a soft flicker, almost as though it were breathing. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the glass. Her father's words echoed in her head. We must know what it is. But Clara's heart whispered something else. She remembered the girl's face, dark skin, tired eyes, clothes that spoke of hardship. She remembered the way the girl had pressed the bottle into her hand without hesitation. She kind, Clara whispered hoarsely to herself. And yet, beneath her gratitude, fear stirred. Why had the girl chosen her? Why bring this to her, a mute millionaire's daughter she had never met? And what did she mean when she said, "You will need it"? Clara shivered beneath her blanket. She had spoken her first words. Yes, but what if the gift carried a cost? Clues in the shadows. Hours passed, and the staff returned one by one, exhausted and empty-handed. No girl, no trace. Only the faint footprints Mr. Graves had seen, leading out into the night. Jonathan returned as well, his face set in grim determination. He dismissed the staff with a wave, but Clara noticed the way his hand clutched his coat pocket. He had learned something. Alone in his study, Jonathan drew out a scrap of paper the old vendor had slipped him. A sketch, hastily drawn of the girl, dark hair tied back with a cloth, wide solemn eyes, and a small satchel slung across her shoulder. Jonathan set the sketch on his desk and stared at it for a long time. His mind whirled with questions. Who was she? Why did she come? And above all, how did she possess something that could do the impossible? For once in his life, the millionaire who believed money could buy every answer found himself staring into a mystery no wealth could solve. Whispers in the town. Meanwhile, down in the poorer quarter of the city, whispers began to spread. She's back, murmured a woman at the water well. I saw her, a man replied, his voice hushed. The girl with the satchel. People say she carries a potion, a miracle in a bottle, a curse, more like someone else spat. No one brings power like that without a price. The whispers grew, carried by fear and awe, and somewhere in the darkness, the girl herself walked quietly, her satchel swinging at her side. She knew the search had begun. She knew the millionaire's eyes would soon be upon her. But instead of running, she whispered to herself, it has started. Her eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, haunted, determined, and carrying secrets that the Langfords could not yet imagine. Back at the mansion, Jonathan entered Clara's room later that night, finding her still awake. He sat on the edge of her bed, his face softer now, though worry still shadowed his eyes. Clara, he said gently, we'll find her. We must. Clara's lips trembled. Don't hurt her, she whispered again, her fragile voice pleading. Jonathan reached for her hand. I won't, but I need to know why she came to you, why she gave you this. He gestured to the glowing bottle on the nightstand. Clara nodded faintly, though her heart twisted. She could feel it. Their lives were about to change forever. The girl was no ordinary stranger. She carried something more powerful than medicine, more dangerous than any cure. And whatever it was, Clara was now a part of it. The search had begun, but the answers they would find might be far more than they were prepared to face. The morning sun bathed the Langford estate in gold, but inside the mansion, tension simmered like a storm cloud. The night-long search had brought back rumors, sketches, and scraps of information, but no girl. Until now. It was near noon when Mr. Graves, the butler, entered Jonathan's study, his face grave. Sir, he said quietly, we've found her. Jonathan shot up from his chair, his heart thundering. Where? In the old chapel ruins by the edge of town. She's waiting. Waiting. The word unsettled him. Why would a fugitive simply wait? Unless she wanted to be found. Jonathan snatched his coat and strode out, every step echoing with determination. Clara, too weak to follow, begged him with her eyes as he passed the room. "Please, kind," she whispered, but he only pressed her hand and promised, "I'll bring you answers." The chapel ruins. The chapel had once been a place of worship, but now its roof was caved in, vines choking the broken windows. The townspeople avoided it, whispering of curses. Yet there, in the middle of the crumbled sanctuary, stood the girl. She was younger than Jonathan expected, no older than 17. Her clothes were ragged, her bare feet dusty from wandering. Yet her eyes, those wide, steady eyes, held a depth far beyond her years. And slung across her shoulder was a satchel, the very satchel that had carried the glowing bottle. Jonathan entered with 2 guards behind him, though he motioned for them to keep back, his sharp gaze fixed on the girl. "You," he said, his voice low, trembling between fury and awe. "You're the one who gave my daughter the liquid." The girl didn't flinch. She simply nodded. Jonathan stepped closer, holding up the bottle that had given Clara her voice. "What is this? What did you give her? Tell me now." The girl's eyes flicked the bottle, then back to Jonathan. Her voice was soft but unshakable. "It is not medicine. It is not poison. It is a gift." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "A gift? From who?" "From you." Her lips curved in the faintest of smiles, but it was not a smile of arrogance. It was one of burden. "Not from me. From something far older." Jonathan frowned, anger and confusion mixing. "Don't speak in riddles." "My daughter, my Clara," she spoke for the first time in her life after drinking this. "And you're telling me it's not medicine? What do you mean?" The girl's gaze drifted toward the broken stained glass window, where sunlight streamed in. "Your daughter was born with silence. But silence is not always a curse. Sometimes it is a shield." Jonathan blinked. "A shield?" The girl's voice dropped lower, almost like a confession. "There are forces in this world that bind themselves to voices. They wait for sound. They hunger for it. Clara was protected because she had none. But now she has opened the door." Jonathan's blood ran cold. His grip tightened on the bottle. "What are you saying? That you put her in danger?" The girl's eyes filled with something like sorrow. "No, I saved her. I gave her the strength to face what is coming. Without her voice, she would have no chance." Jonathan staggered back, his mind reeling. He wanted to dismiss her words as madness, the ramblings of a desperate child. But a voice deep inside warned him otherwise. The girl's story. "Who are you?" Jonathan demanded. The girl finally lowered her gaze, her fingers brushing the satchel strap. "My name is Amara." Jonathan repeated it softly, tasting the unfamiliar weight of it. "Amara, what are you doing here? Why my daughter?" Amara closed her eyes, her voice trembling now, not with fear but with memory. "I come from a place your world forgets, a village far beyond the city, hidden in the hills. We were poor, yes, but we were also protectors. For generations, my family carried the knowledge of this." She nodded toward the glowing bottle. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "Knowledge? You mean witchcraft?" Amara shook her head firmly. "Not witchcraft. Legacy. A blessing that can heal, awaken, and strengthen, but only when given freely. Only when the receiver has a pure heart." Jonathan stiffened. "And you chose my Clara." "Yes," Amara said simply, "because her silence was not emptiness. It was purity, and because she will need more than just her father's wealth in the days to come." Jonathan's chest heaved. He wanted to reject her words, to call her a liar. But deep inside, he knew Clara's eyes, the same eyes that had pleaded for him not to hurt Amara, had seen something true. Still, fear gnawed at him. Why now? Why give this to her at all? Amara's gaze grew distant. "Because the time has come. Shadows are rising. Things your world doesn't see until it's too late. Your daughter is more important than you realize. She is not just a girl without a voice. She is the voice the world will need." The word struck Jonathan like thunder. His throat went dry. He shook his head, unable to accept such weight. Clara was his daughter. Yes, but she was fragile, gentle, a child who had spent her life in silence. How could she be what this girl claimed? You expect me to believe this? Jonathan demanded. That my daughter is some kind of chosen one? Amara stepped forward, her voice quiet but sharp. You don't have to believe me, but you will see. Already, the gift has changed her. Already, her voice has broken the silence that once protected her. And already, the shadows are listening. Jonathan's breath caught. The way she said shadows sent a chill through him. He glanced down at the bottle again, its glow pulsing faintly. He thought of Clara, sitting in her room with wide, tearful eyes, whispering Father for the first time. A miracle, but at what cost? He looked back at Amara, anger and fear burning in his eyes. If what you say is true, then you've dragged my daughter into something dangerous. Amara's steady gaze didn't waver. No, I've given her the only chance she has. The choice. Jonathan's guard shifted uneasily. The air in the ruined chapel felt heavier now, as though the broken walls themselves were listening. Jonathan lowered the bottle, his hand trembling. For years, he had believed money could solve everything. But this was beyond contracts and power. This was something ancient, something terrifying, and somehow his daughter was at the center of it. Amara's voice softened. You can hate me, you can fear me, but do not take her gift from her. Do not silence her again. Her voice is her strength, and one day soon it will save more than just herself. Jonathan stared at her, torn between rage and awe, hope and dread. His heart screamed to protect Clara, to shield her from whatever storm was coming. But for the first time in his life, he realized he could not, because Clara's miracle had already set something into motion, and nothing could stop it now. Jonathan Langford had spent his whole life believing that money could solve anything. But now, standing in the quiet halls of his mansion, he realized wealth meant nothing compared to the fragile sound of his daughter's voice. Clara was no longer the silent child he had tried so desperately to fix. She was changing, stronger every day, her words carrying a weight that none of them fully understood. When she spoke, people listened. When she sang, even the walls seemed to tremble. And beside her stood Amara, the mysterious girl who had given her the gift. Jonathan still struggled to trust her, but Clara's joy, her newfound confidence, left him with no choice. The shift. One evening, Jonathan found Clara in the garden, singing a simple tune. The flowers seemed to sway, though no wind was blowing. Servants stood at a distance, watching in awe, whispering prayers under their breath. "Father," Clara said when she noticed him, her voice clear and warm, "don't be afraid anymore. My silence is gone. This is who I am meant to be." Jonathan swallowed hard. Fear tugged at him, but for the first time, pride was stronger. "Then I will stand with you," he said softly. Amara stepped forward, her expression calm but serious. The shadows are stirring. They have heard her voice. Soon they will come. Jonathan's hands clenched, but this time he didn't falter. He looked at Clara, then back at Amara. "Then let them come. If my daughter's voice is her strength, I will never silence her again." The new beginning. From that night on, life inside the Langford mansion transformed. Jonathan was no longer just a protective father. He became Clara's ally. He gave her the freedom to speak, to sing, and to explore the gift that once frightened him. Clara's laughter echoed to the halls like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She was no longer a prisoner of silence. She was a voice the world needed, even if Jonathan didn't yet understand why. And though fear still lingered in his heart, he chose to believe in her, to believe in the impossible. For Jonathan, it wasn't the end of his daughter's story. It was only the beginning, and so, a billionaire's mute daughter drank a poor girl's mysterious liquid, and the impossible happened. She spoke. She laughed. She found her voice. But what was this gift really? Why do the shadows stir now that her silence is broken? And most importantly, what future awaits a girl whose voice was never meant to exist? If you want to find out what happens next, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because Clara's story has only just begun.